Okay, here we are. I am so excited to welcome to my Substack, The Damn Digest, my friend, Dr. Jonathan Metzl, who is the author of, oh, I don't know how many New York Times best-selling books, but you all may know him as the author of Dying of Whiteness, as well as What We've Become. You might have heard him on every single one of my shows, whether it be Woke AF, The New Abnormal, um, everywhere that I can bring Jonathan, I do. And so this is his first Substack Live, everybody. Like it was a feat to get him on here, but we are here. And today, Jonathan, I entitled this, um, diagnosing America, right? I feel like every time that I want to understand where we are, your book Dying of Whiteness always seems to like center the moment, right? And so here we are, 3.5 months, it feels like 300 years into the second Trump regime, and people are now experiencing the find out part of the fuck around, right? They are experiencing exactly what it is that we've been telling them not to vote for, right? And they chose to vote for it. So, what do you make of is there a level, do you think, of consciousness or regret or understanding around these people who have been championing Trump and now are starting to feel the pain of what they voted for?
Well, first, I am so glad to be here. This is fantastic. And if people knew what it took for me to like 20 minutes ago, I'm like, wait, it's on your phone, you know? And then and then I jerry rigged a little stage here using my softball glove, and then downloaded the app. And so I feel like I'm entering into a new portal now, which is
Yes,
really
you are.
really exciting for me. And also doing it based on like our now 5 year long conversation.
Yes.
So to me, that's wonderful. I guess there are two different ways to answer that question that I've been thinking about. And the first one is just people are overwhelmed right now. Things are happening so fast and so quickly. And so any one of the issues that we're faced with in the present moment would have been like a protest and a march. And I study guns for my last research. They're allowing basically devices that make semi-automatic weapons to turn into automatic weapons. That would have been like, let's march down Park Avenue for that kind of thing. Women's reproductive rights, obviously Medicare, Medicaid cuts, the taxes, foreign policy, you name it. And so it's happening so fast, and that's kind of the strategy, right? That you can't keep up with it. And so I think our brains can only handle so much. And so
Yeah.
there's a level of, call it what you want, learned helplessness, detachment, um, uh, um, anomie, if you're a sociologist, giving up, despair. So if you don't agree with what's happening now, um, part of it is that, and then there's also this tribalization that's happening where everybody's divided in groups. So we might be on the same side about saving Medicare and Medicaid, for example, but we don't agree about um, what some other thing, and every day there's something that tribalizes us. Like, I don't think 6 months ago, if you ask people to like stand up for white people in South Africa, for example, anybody would have had a problem with it or something like that. So everybody's kind of being divided, and so it's kind of the strategy. And I think we have to realize, first of all, that that's the strategy we're faced with, which is having people feel like their voice doesn't matter, like there's no coherent way to fight back, and the best thing you can do is just give up and accept it. And so in part that's psychological, but it's also strategic. Like, that's what we're supposed to be feeling. And and we have to figure out how to fight back against that, which is a different strategy than fighting back against one particular issue. Like, everybody's got their issue, but if I don't feel like I'm a gun safety advocate right now. I feel like I'm a coherent, let's keep our team together and form some coherent answer to all this person. And so that, I think that's part of it, is just our brains are scattered, and we're pushing the limits of, really honestly, the potential of the human brain right now in
You,
terms of that.
it's so right. It's funny because the other day I tell people all the time I am in therapy, right? Like I've been in therapy for years. I think everybody should be in therapy. And I said to my therapist, like, do you even feel skilled in this moment to deal with like the level of fear and anxiety that people have? Like I have seen so many therapists on social media post about the fact that like the industry is not of like psychiatry, of therapy, is not built for this, right? It's not built for what the experience is, the human experience of living inside of a crumbling empire. And my own therapist was just like, no, right? Like I have these skills to help people unpack and kind of see patterns in their lives and modify behavior, and etc. But or stop the record from playing in their head that they're replaying of certain things. But like the fear and the anxiety is not being made up. We're not making it up in our heads. And so she was saying that it's a challenge. So I want to ask you, right, like as a doctor, like about your industry and whether or not you feel like it is built for this moment and what that even means.
I mean, if you mean my industry being the mental health industry, I think that I think that on one hand, I do agree with people saying that self care is very important right now. It's not an answer. The problem that mental health gets into is positing an answer to protest or resistance or politics. We are definitely not set up for that. And in fact, at other times in history, we get in trouble for diagnosing political problems or telling people that the problem's in their mind when in fact the problem is, you know, I mean, my book Protest Psychosis was about how we diagnosed the mind when in fact the problem was structural racism in America and things like that. And so, but I do think that the question of like self, how can you take care of yourself right now? How can you form community? Those are all really important questions. So to me, that's where mental health is really important, is just that self-care, the feeling of, how do you fight back against feeling overwhelmed or helpless? It's not an answer to a problem. Psychiatry is not going to, mental health is not going to help us fight our way out of this problem.
Right.
And it's not like, but it can help us feel stronger to come up with our own strategy. So that's kind of, I think, just kind of setting the groundwork
Mm-hmm.
for what's realistic. I think is where we should be right now. There are people who feel differently, that we should be fighting back. I mean, when Trump was first elected, there was, I think you and I talked about this, a book about diagnosing Trump. And I was like, I don't want anything to do with that because that's not what we're good at. Turned out that book was like on the New York Times bestseller list for a year. And, so I'm like, hey, wait, can I redo? But, uh, but,
Yeah,
uh, but,
can I
but,
get a
but,
redo?
but again, I just think it's important to know that like there are a lot of people right now who feel great about what's happening, and there are a lot of people who feel like this is what needs to happen. There are a lot of people who feel like dismantling the government is what we should have been doing all along. And so I think that psychiatry tries to be ostensibly neutral. I mean, that's kind of the whole idea of psychoanalysis, at least initially. And so I think that right now it's like, how can we take care of ourselves? And importantly, how can we build communities so we don't feel isolated and alone? I think that is a really vital service right now. And then also, of course, there's a politics to mental health. That's a whole other issue. But for me, that's also the domain of sociology and anthropology and political science that psychology has an important contribution to that, but that's different from treating individual people.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess the reality is that I said this yesterday on a live that I did with my other friend Jared Yates Sexton, and we were talking about self care, and I said I'm changing the phrase self care for myself, and I'm calling it nervous system management, right? Because I feel like a part of what fascism does is beat your nervous system down, is send us into all of these different kinds of emotional spirals that have physical implications, right? That your dis-ease can manifest itself into disease, right? And that taking care of yourself, whether that is nutrition, exercise, connecting with community, not self-isolating because you're in such a hard space, right? And you see other people around you that are like powering through. And so to say, like, I'm struggling feels like it feels vulnerable. It feels like offering weakness. And so when you think about it as nervous system management and not the way that we've commodified self-care, right? Like, and turned it into kind of this like Lululemon like model of, oh, well, we'll just practice yoga and then everything will be well. What does that mean to you in terms of like how we manage our nervous systems in this moment?
Oh, you know, I keep thinking I want to make a Lululemon joke, but I'll save it.
You'll save it for
Yeah,
later.
I'll say it.
Okay.
They do make nice men's pants, by the way.
Hmm.
But but it's funny. What I've been thinking about recently is it's not about individual psychology. Now, as everybody knows, I'm a centrist liberal Democrat. I feel like I don't have a
I don't
I,
know what your affiliation is these
yeah.
days, but
I don't.
every time we talk, it's like, well,
I just feel like I don't have a narrative right now. And
right.
so I guess for me, part of the, yes, I slept 7 hours last night. I feel great. I woke up in the middle of the night. I had a snack. I did stretching exercises this morning. I did all those things. I'm much better off because I did those things. Um, but my mental health is also worse right now. I'll just talk personally because like I feel like I'm on a side that doesn't have a coherent narrative of how to deal with this moment. In other words, I feel like, and I'm saying this very intentionally, I feel like I'm on the opposite side of the US government. I feel like my side is scrambling for a
Yep.
strategy for how to
Mm-hmm.
change things. And so it's almost like I'm thinking back to that research where like people were more likely to have a heart attack if their team lost a football game. Um, that in a way, being on the side of like a team that's getting beat every
Pummeled.
day,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, is actually another thing that has to do with health, physical health, mental health. And I see that as a challenge. And the reason I'm saying that is because it's almost the flip side of what I've been studying for all these years, right? I've been studying for 20 years now people who are disaffected, right wing extremists who feel like the government is against them, who are trading away months and years of their lives because they feel like total despair because the government is doing globalization and DEI and they are against the government. And people like me coded that as, fuck around and find out or
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
retribution or something like that. But
Mm-hmm.
it's funny, like I'm working on my new book now and I'm interviewing a lot of right wingers and they feel like euphoric, right? They feel great. And I'm the one who's like anti government and clenching my
Yeah.
fists
Yeah.
and stuff like that. So in a way, the roles are totally reversed. And so I just think it's important to note that how did that reversal happen? And as you and I've talked about a ton, it's not just about psychology. It's actually that there was a coherent narrative of fighting back against government oppression and all these things that actually won the Republican Party and then won elections. And so I just don't think that individual psychology is totally separate from political psychology right now.
Mm-hmm.
That part of the reason people feel bad, and they should give them acknowledge this, is we're struggling for a narrative for how we can respond politically to this moment. Which I don't know. Wouldn't you agree? It kind of impacts our mental health. And so those are two kind of separate things. But I don't know. I don't know what my quote unquote side is going to do to get us out of this. And so it feels very isolating.
The other day, like yesterday, on my evening show that I do on YouTube, the Danielle Moody show, I was explaining what Cory Booker had just done, right? This week, which was he was the lone Democrat in the Senate to vote for Charles Kushner to become the French ambassador, right? And this man, convicted felon, right? Uh was so disgusting and maniacal in his criminal activity that he hired a prostitute to sleep with his sister's husband, film it to blackmail her into stopping her communication with the feds against him. Cory Booker, who was on the floor for 25 and a half hours, voted for that man yesterday. And I said to myself, aside from the fact that the senator is now a profound just disappointment, like in a span of a few weeks, he went from being celebrated for honoring this moment by disrupting it and doing something drastic to draw attention, to now being complicit in the reason why we maintain the status quo of inequality in this country. And for me, it was like, I'm tired of Democrats. I don't even know if I call myself honestly, and I Democratic strategist, go on TV, Democratic spokesperson, X, Y, and Z. And in this moment, I couldn't be less aligned with the Democratic Party. I couldn't be less aligned with their lack of narrative, their lack of backbone. Um, I'm disgusted actually. And so that does, for me, result in a kind of grief, right? Like that I didn't realize that I had, right? Like grieving the loss of this political party, this institution that had meant so much in my life and in my work, that is just an utter failure.
Um, and you think that's, I mean, part of the issue, I'm just thinking of Jason Stanley's book about fascism and how the greatest thing for fascism is having a fractured opposition, right? And so the idea that basically we all feel like we're on different sides of some kind of thing, that's kind of the strategy. I'm not defending voting for Kushner, but I would just say that, again, what I learned studying the right was 20 years ago, maybe 30 years ago, if people would have said, oh, you're going to vote for a guy who, and just name every single thing Trump's done, they would be like, no, we are, religion as our guide, and we don't vote for, I mean, probably even voting for like a divorced person would have been a no-go for the right 40 years ago. And then the unifying narrative was, here's what we do to take power and own the libs. And so people, I mean, think of all the stuff that came up as if people thought like, oh, exposing this thing about Trump, his hypocrisy is going to matter. But people were on board with this bigger story, which is, this is a secondary story to the bigger story, which is power. And so they didn't, quote unquote, fall for the kind
Hmm.
of provocations of this person was in, this person was out. It was just like, are you on our team or not? And so I don't know if the Democrats can get there, or our side, or don't even call it Democrats, whatever. But I just think that kind of uniformity, I can just say with expertise, is what got us to this position, because the right, and you can see it, right? They're not falling for, I mean, think about what happened in the White House yesterday with, you know, with Afrikaners and stuff like that. Like, it's the people are not falling for the provocation. They're saying, oh yeah, the bigger strategy for us is power. And that's, it goes back to your initial point, which is, there's a fantasy, I think, of the, oh, you voted for Trump and this is what you got, and now you're going to pay for it and you're going to regret your vote. And I know social media is full of those kind of narratives, but I just think people should ask, how representative are those narratives of the bigger category of people who voted for Trump? In other words, do most Trump voters feel like, oh, this isn't what they bargained for and they're going to turn it around? Or are these the narratives that get you onto social media, particularly in ways that liberals and progressives will see? And I sense it's more the former than the latter. I have no idea. I know during the election, as I was studying this stuff, like there's an idea of, oh, this is what you voted for and this is what you're getting. But these are kind of the stories that get traction. They go viral. Oh, these
Hmm.
these
Hmm.
people voted for this and then they got it. But that's different from, oh, this is going to move the needle and we're going to change. You need to be much more proactive about setting the narrative. At least that's what this is what I found over the years. And so that's a very long answer to your question, except to say that um, I'm very wary of the fuck around and find out narrative right now. And I think people should be wary of it too, because it doesn't get us off the hook of actually having to construct a proactive narrative that's not reactive to all the crazy shit happening, because there are always going to be people who are unhappy with their vote, but that doesn't mean we're going to win the next vote.
The funny thing is, like, and I tell people this often. This is where you and I differ, and I think that it's important that we differ in this space, because for me, I don't care whether or not people who voted for Donald Trump regret their vote. I really don't. I believe that 40% of the country we're never ever going to get back. And that's just the reality. So I don't condone corporate media, constantly going into Rust Belt diners to get, to be in conversation with people as to why they follow a cult leader and why, that there's no level of depravity that this party can show that they won't jump up and down for and cheer for. So I don't care about 40% of the country. And I'm just very honest about that. I really don't. I don't care what happens to them. I don't care why they voted for Donald Trump. Who I am concerned with, however, is the 60%. I'm concerned with the millions of people that literally decided that they weren't going to vote in this past election, that they were going to seat it out, whether it was because of Gaza, whether it was because of, the economy, like whatever it was. Or I just can't bring myself to vote for a woman, a black woman, an Asian woman, whatever it was. I'm more concerned with the people who thought that they could ride this next term out because we were able to make it through the first Trump administration. I'm more concerned with those people who are now like, this is worse than I thought that it was going to be. I didn't think it was going to be that big of a deal. We've dealt with the Bushes and we've dealt with Trump, 1.0. I don't really care, right? So now those people are waking up and they're saying, wait a minute, I'm sending my kid to university and now I'm concerned that they're going to be arrested on campus just simply because they're black or brown or they're wearing a hijab. I'm now concerned that my sister-in-law, who was a government worker, has now lost her job. And there are hundreds of thousands of other people that have lost their job. I didn't think that that was going to happen. So, what, like, about those people, to me, like the unifying narrative is the fact that you deserve a better life. You deserve access to a better life. And I don't understand why Democrats can't muster the bare minimum in that dialogue.
Well, it's not, I don't think it's that they're not mustering. It's that they are. There's a bunch of different mustering strains going around, and so some people, we're in a situation now where I'm just thinking about what you said about Rust Belt diners and why somebody like the artist formerly known as Mayor Pete, for example, is going around. Sorry, sort of make that joke. Is going around, talking to quote unquote crossover audiences, and I think there are two realities that are important about that. One is that it's important for people to make inroads into the right wing, um, you know, their social media imprint, their all of these
The
kind of
right wing
things.
ecosystem.
Yeah, yeah, it just has much farther reach, and so getting name recognition, combating stereotypes, stuff like that. It's just until the left starts to have the kind of reach that some of the, Joe Rogans and other podcasters and other people have. It's unfortunately going to be the case where to speak to a bigger audience, you kind of have to. It's not just about Rust Belt voters; it's about the reach of that audience. So that part of it is just a numbers game. And then we are in a political system, at least right today, maybe not tomorrow, where national elections are decided um, based on quote unquote undecided voters in quote unquote swing states. And so you and I disagreed about this through the election. And it's not really a disagreement. I wouldn't put it that strongly, although if that's good for, we could like go toe to toe or something if that's good for conflict cells. But I would just say that Democrats, I did an event before the election with Rachel Bitkefer, our friend, and she is all about negative things, like hammer them on the negative points. Don't just hammer them on the negative points. And she's really good. Like if you listen to her, she'll be like, they're killing your cats, damn it, or something like that. Like she's really good about that. But I still think that Democrats or liberals or whatever side is going to represent our interests going forward, just the psychology of just hammering them without saying it. Here's what I'm going to give you. I don't totally buy it. I mean, think about what Trump did. He sold people on this false dream of prosperity and wellness and all this kind of things. And so remember, every time, even after the Democratic convention, which was so great in so many ways, But I kept saying there's nothing aspirational beyond government that in what she's suggesting. And so it's not telling people I'm going to loosen restrictions and help you get rich, which is what Trump was saying. And so there has to be some kind of like unifying message that might talk to some of the people you're talking about and talk to people in the Rust Belt. I just don't see how, I don't see how we, first we have to get our own house in order. But, and so I don't know, maybe that won't happen until there's a primary. If we have one, maybe that won't happen until whatever, but I don't know. It's just, I don't know. When do you think that could possibly happen? But I just don't,
I
I
mean,
think,
like,
yeah,
look, I think that people know me as a, I joke and say that I'm a pessimist, and I joke and say that like I carry but a mustard seed of like hope around,
a mustard
but
seed.
but yeah, but like clearly I wouldn't do the work that I do and speak out in the way that I do if I didn't believe that people have the ability to change,
Yeah.
right? Like I wouldn't waste my time, right, trying to connect the dots for people if I didn't think that there was a great capacity for human beings to change, right, and understand and recognize their power. I think that unfortunately, though, and I've said this before, is that there is something that is necessary about Donald Trump, right? There is something necessary about him to a sleeping public, right? That believed that democracy, much like their heartbeat and their breath, they weren't going to have to pay attention to. It was just going to continue moving. And the only time that people really recognize, right, their breathing is EA, right, when it's harmed, when there's an obstacle to that breath. And you think about your heartbeat when there is a problem that is there. And so for me, it's like, I didn't want to be a part of the collective pain because I've always been conscious, right? To what happens when you oppress people, to what happens when you have unabated greed, to all of those things. And so I feel like the narrative that we're searching for is going to be collective pain, right? It's going to be collective suffering. And that to me is really fucking unfortunate because we didn't have to get to this place, right? Donald Trump is doing everything that he said that he would do, right? Nothing that is happening is a surprise. I think the pace is a surprise for most people, but I kept saying, as so many other people with bigger platforms would say, Hitler dismantled Germany government in 53 fucking days,
Yeah.
right? So, like, why are people shocked at the pace? Why did they believe that this thing that we told them was coming, this Project 2025 that they wrote in a book and binded it? Why did they believe that that wasn't going to happen to them? And so I feel like there is a necessity, like, they say that in order to, grow muscles, you need to, like, shock them, right? Like, in order to create a necessary change in your life, you don't do it when things are great. You do it when you face adversity. And to me, there's a part of this where I believe that Donald Trump is necessary in order for us to recognize that democracy, as America had presented it to us, was democracy-ish, right? It was broken, right? It didn't work and function for all people. And so now that it's being taken away from everyone, maybe that's the opportunity that we need in order to actually imagine not just continuing with the status quo, but to create something completely new. So
Well,
I'll give last words to you, my friend.
the caveat for me always is my last book was about it was supposed to be called How We Lost, but the publisher uh, wouldn't let me title it that way. But it was about the American quote unquote gun debate. And the argument of the book, as you know, is that Democrats thought they won the gun debate because they won public opinion. 92% of people agreed with background checks. 89% of people agreed with red flag laws, but it actually made negative policy impact because popular opinion, we won social media, we won hearts and minds, we lost judges, we lost gerrymandering. We had no theory of power. We were totally invested in popular opinion. And it turned out that we were up against an adversary who completely understood like guns were just a means for mobilizing predictable voting blocks in swing state areas that would then win elections, gerrymander, seat judges, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it wasn't just about popular opinion, it was about having a theory of power. And so, I think Democrats really need to learn from that. I hope people who get a chance to read my book can see that we were fighting on the terrain of popular opinion. Like, oh, there's a mass shooting. People, of course, will change their minds. And people did change their minds, but it didn't matter for the bigger story. I mean, the mass shootings are horrific, but the bigger story was we were up against a uniform, monolithic theory of power whose first aim was to take control of the judiciary and go from there. And so we need exactly what you're saying, a coalition, but we also need a kind of uniform theory of like how we're going to get out of this, which is really challenging now because so many of the institutions that we've relied on are being put out of business or
Yep.
dismantled or taken
Yep.
apart.
Yep.
And so it's got to be some kind of pro growth, pro power strategy that learns that just changing popular opinion is it's important for mobilizing, but it's also we have to think much more upstream, I guess, than we have in the past. And in a way, that's how Republicans, quote unquote, mobilize people, is that they sold people on winning, right? It wasn't just the issue, it was on winning. And I think Democrats are struggling with that right now. I sure hope we get there. But I think that just being in the weeds and being reactive, I mean, yes, most people want healthcare. Believe it or not, most people want vaccines. Most people are going to want the COVID vaccine in the fall. Um, but but it has to be tied to some bigger strategy. And I'm kind of waiting for somebody to articulate that. I think it will be something that we can hopefully get around much more than the fractured nature of what we have now.
Last question for you, because it just came to my mind. In an interview a couple of weeks ago, one of my co-hosts for As the World Churns, Andy Levy, was speaking with a journalist who offered the fact that it wasn't a journalist, I'm sorry, it was an academic who said that he believed that the destruction that Donald Trump has done already is going to take a generation to fix. And he said that, and that was him being optimistic. And, and I think you have made the joke of feeling like we're like 3 months into the 100-year war, wondering when it's going to end,
No,
right? Like,
the joke is I can't believe this shit lasted 3 months already. The guy in the 100-Year War who said, I can't believe we lasted 3 years of this
can't
goddamn war.
believe we lasted it, right?
Yeah.
So I'm like, so my last question for you is, you know, do you think that do you believe that this is a generational loss, right? That the America that you and I have grown up in, you and I have seen, have worked for, that is done, and that it will take a generation or generations for America to reclaim any semblance of itself.
Honestly, I think we need to throw out the playbook right now because the idea that we're going to build back what we had 6 months ago is, to me, unrealistic.
Yep.
Um, and so the question is, what aspirational narrative can we get where we take what we have now and then you have a unifying narrative that builds something better and more honest and more transparent and more equitable, right? So many people can't afford housing, so many people can't afford healthcare. That's going to get much worse because of this. I mean, they called it the BBB bill, like, good job, dudes. But but uh, but yeah, so I think something different has to emerge, and part of why that is, as you know, because we've talked about it for years, is the fantasy of burning it all down and then building it all back up implies that we're not going to just have the same divisions when we go to build it back, but we're going to have the same divisions, right? And so it's not like, oh, everybody, again, 95% of people support background checks. It didn't matter. So even if 95% of people agree with building it back, we need some kind of coherent pro growth, I'll just say, like, entrepreneurial. It's a very entrepreneurial moment. We need to kind of channel the moment for what people are feeling about despair and turn that into possibility in a way that brings in as many players as we can and ties to actually winning. And so I think that whatever gets built next is going to be really different. I don't think we're going to rebuild
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
much
Yeah.
as I hate it.
Yeah.
the public health infrastructure, the healthcare infrastructure. But there are people out there who are working on it, who are on my side, if I can see them that way, who are, some kids working on a new app for how you can go to the doctor in your own neighborhood and stuff like that. I want those people all working in a way that is coherent. So I don't think we're going to go back. I don't. I don't think you. I don't think you rebuild the institutions that were post World War II institutions. I do think there's a vacuum for a new vision right now that can be incredibly empowering if we can articulate it.
Yeah. Well, my friend, Dr. Jonathan Metzl, this was the most fun. And folks, thank you so much for joining. This is Jonathan's first Substack Live. He had to download the app. He had to get himself here. And he managed to
Let me
do
just show you
so.
what this looks like. I had my phone in my softball glove.
I
So-
love it so much. I appreciate you so much, Jonathan. Thank you, folks. And the books that Jonathan has, the writing. Where can people see you next? You're
Jonathan
talking
Metzl.
all over the place.
I am. Just look on jonathanmetzl.com and that's where you can find me. Or I think I got one Substack subscriber, so you can talk to my one subscriber here also. But yeah, I have a lot of stuff coming up, so I'll send it out.
Amazing. Thank you, my friend, and be well. Thank you all for watching us with Diagnosing America with Dr. Jonathan Metzl. Be well.